slowly killing the WWE. Is TKO slowly killing the WWE? Is TKO slowly killing the WWE? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ango Show Live. Today is May 28th. It is a Wednesday. You know what that means. And here on the Ango Show, we have a very big day filled with tons and tons of topics. Today, I'll be bringing in my co-host just momentarily. But on today's lineup, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about some main roster call-ups. Last night's NXT had a very, very shocking win, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that. Also, some very groundbreaking news surrounding the Janel Grant lawsuit here on the Ango Show. This is a story that we've been paying attention to for a very long time. Now we're going to give you guys a massive update. But of course, when talking about the Janel Grant lawsuit, we also have to address a theory that Vince McMahon wants to buy WWE back. And well, that is going to be a very interesting conversation. All of that, plus some AEW news, Evolution 2, and so much more. With that being said, joining me live today remotely from Discord, we have our good buddy here, BillyTKO. Shout out to Billy. Welcome to the show, brother. How is it going this beautiful afternoon in the Windy City, Detroit area? I know. I'm good, man. Thank you for joining us. Billy is a content creator on YouTube. He does watch-alongs, reactions, and everything. So I'm very pleased to have you here because some of these stories that we are seeing are really just interesting stories, to be honest with you. I think there's a lot of stuff happening today. And, of course, on the Ango Show Live, one of our biggest things is to have that conversation. And sometimes these conversations could be the kind of conversations that other content creators are scared to have. But here on the Ango Show, we're all about bringing the community together. I just saw we had a technical issue where people weren't able to hear you, but nonetheless, I have fixed that. Billy is here. Shout out to the chat. Shout out to everybody watching us live exclusively on YouTube. If you guys are watching live, if you could do a wonderful favor and click like on the live episode, as well as consider donating to the channel with a super chat. At the end of the show, we will go through the super chats and we will address every single question, every single comment. Of course, yesterday was a very, very big episode of NXT. So I'm very curious to see some of your guys' takes and some of your questions and some of your comments. And I think with that being said, I think we should just jump right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's kick things off with something truly groundbreaking, and that is the latest update on the Janel Grant lawsuit. Now, for those who are completely unaware, the Janel Grant lawsuit has been ongoing for a very long time now, and today we got a massive, massive update. So, today it has officially come out that Lauranitis has now been dropped from the Janel Grant lawsuit after agreeing to provide her evidence on the case. Now, this is absolutely astonishing. A statement was made to Post Wrestling. Plaintiff Janel Grant hereby stipulates with defendant Lauranitis that the above entitled action is voluntarily dismissed with prejudice against defendant Lauranitis. Now, with that being said, Janel Grant's side of things have claimed that Lauranitis has agreed to provide her with evidence related to the case. John Lauranitis has agreed to cooperate and provide evidence in Janel Grant's lawsuit against Vince McMahon and WWE. His agreement to a confidential settlement is a pivotal next step toward holding McMahon and WWE accountable and bringing justice to Miss Grant after years of sexual abuse and trafficking. Mr. Lauranitis looks forward to moving on with his life. We cannot provide any additional details at this time. With that being said, just if you guys have been not following the lawsuit, on May 7th, Janel Grant's request to amend her lawsuit against Vince McMahon, John Lauranitis, and WWE was approved by the judge known as Sarah F. Russell. Now, with that being said, the defendants are expected to file motions to move the case out of public court and into private arbitration by June 13th. Grant can now request discovery related to litigation over whether the arbitration clause included in the $3 million non-disclosure agreement will be enforced. Now, with that being said, this is a very, very explosive, groundbreaking update because, as you guys know, Janel Grant's lawsuit was against John Lauranitis and Vince McMahon and the WWE, and John Lauranitis has kind of taken a very interesting approach with what has been said and what has been done. First, he says, that, he kind of played it off like he was a victim. Then he kind of played it off, there's just been so many different things here that have been said, and now it appears John Lauranitis is turning the tables, going against Vince McMahon and the WWE. Obviously, this is a big stain. I think that's very clear. I think everybody kind of understands what has happened here is not a good look for all parties involved. Billy, when you hear about John Lauranitis being dropped from the lawsuit and then he decides he is going to cooperate with them to hand over evidence, which seems to be something that maybe Vince McMahon has been reluctant to do, what's your initial reaction to something of that nature?
Well, first off, I want to make sure everybody can hear me, right? I just want to make sure before I go ahead and answer.
Yeah.
Ango, you can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then I think we're going to be okay. All right. So when I hear that, the real answer to that is that, without sounding like it's so hard because the straightforward answer is, well, he's guilty of something, correct? Once you've decided that, and now, again, I just have to preface with me saying, like, he's guilty. That's just my personal take. I have to preface that. That's how I feel, right? Obviously, I'm no court of law, anything like that. These are obviously very touchy things to touch on. But regardless of that fact, I hear that, and that's just instantly what I think. Again, I'm no attorney, I'm no public defender, anything along those lines. But normally when something like that occurs and you start cooperating, it's because you know that you've done something wrong. And that's like the short answer. This case has been just so touchy. And it's even hard to speak about, again, I'm just a regular guy here in Detroit talking about pro wrestling. And then we get into these fine, the fine print of things, and you start looking at this case a little bit different, or you start looking at this case and, of course it's in the news, so you got to talk about it. But regardless of that fact, it's still touchy, and, you never want to say the wrong thing. You know what I mean? So just regardless of that fact, that's normally what I take out of that.
Yeah, I think one of the crazy parts about the whole Janel Grant lawsuit is that I feel like initially this was something that obviously strayed a lot of people away from Vince McMahon. And of course, with allegations, there is a judicial system in America, and that's their job to figure it out, right? And so, of course, we have to remain very, very open and honest with you guys about this for the simple fact that it is still allegations. Now, of course, that's why the judicial system is important here, because they are going to figure it out. And of course, with John Lauranitis offering some sort of evidence, maybe we'll get some clear idea of what really, really happened, and who's really guilty and who's not guilty, and whatever it may be. Some interesting tweet that I saw, by the way, was that some people were saying, well, if Vince really wanted to end it all, he could have just done a settlement of some kind, and this would all be done with. And that obviously hasn't happened yet. So we are watching this develop over time into something that is getting bigger and bigger, obviously covered more by the mainstream news, which is to be expected. However, I actually found this to be quite the interesting topic, Billy. And the reason for that is because we have another story today that I just find to be incredibly interesting considering the landscape of professional wrestling today. Because when Vince McMahon allegations did come out, a lot of people were like, good, get him out of here. He's a sicko. He's a creep. He's this. A lot of people on social media ran through to smear Vince McMahon. However, in the last few days after Double or Nothing and seeing what happened with WWE this past weekend and WrestleMania this past year, a lot of people are saying on social media that Vince McMahon should come back to the company, which is so interesting because just, a few years ago, it was get him away from this. And now people all of a sudden want to bring him back, which I think that's an argument to be made with social media. You can't necessarily take it too serious. You will definitely find the hypocrites. However, there is a story circulating, and I do want to transition to the story of Vince McMahon reportedly wanting to buy WWE back. Now, this is interesting because it's coming from Jonathan Coachman, who, of course, is not Vince McMahon. And of course, I think we have to preface everything by stating that it's an interesting topic because of the nature of everything happening, especially with the Janel Grant lawsuit, and also probably with the idea, even if Vince McMahon, if this were particularly true, more than likely it would never, ever happen. I think it would be quite impossible. However, speaking on Coach and Bro, Jonathan Coachman, who was an ex-WWE announcer, claims that that's exactly what WWE, the former WWE CEO, wanted. He says, I mentioned it on Twitter, and I've been, by the way, going viral. You've probably seen where I've been quoted everywhere where I talked about Vince rebuying. I've been quoted everywhere. And the one thing I've yet to be wrong about anything. And now, so all of a sudden, I'm getting all these websites because I have educated views and I have people that are tipping me off. Now, do I know 100% he's going to buy? I know he wants to. Now, this is a very fascinating story because initially he was talking about him, more specifically Vince McMahon wanting to buy WWE back. And I don't see a world where this genuinely makes sense. And I want to talk about it. I want to share my opinion with you guys on this because this is one of those things where I think it would be catastrophic for WWE and it would be really bad for AEW. So for those who are unaware, Vince wants to buy WWE back, and that's coming from Jonathan Coachman. Now, again, as I said earlier, people wanted Vince McMahon to come back because they're not happy with Triple H's booking. But these are the same people who wanted Vince gone, and they targeted Vince after the allegations came out. If Vince McMahon were to attempt to buy WWE, there is no possible way TKO would let that happen. The WWE brand is so much stronger under TKO, especially because of its affiliation with UFC, professional bull riders, on location, and just some of these other assets that they've all grouped in together with TKO. Not only that, they're also launching a boxing league, right? The price of WWE has gone up significantly. So Vince could want to buy WWE back, but TKO would never do it. It's not going to happen at all. The only chance that Vince McMahon ever has to do a wrestling company ever again is to start from scratch. And while he could have the money to do so, I don't think Vince McMahon would be successful with it because the damage has been done. And I think that is one of the biggest takeaways I have with Vince McMahon and these allegations and everything that has surfaced. Whether they're proven to be true or false, I do believe the damage has been done significantly. And I think that is just one of those things where he won't be able to rebound from it. And I think that's probably the hardest part about this all. Billy, when you hear about this, you see the topic, you see people are talking about this on social media. What is your reaction to something like this?
My initial reaction is people are reactionary. You know, how's the saying go? You're messed up if you do, you're messed up if you don't, right? Um, and I think that speaks volumes here. Triple H a year and a half ago was the greatest booker of all time, and maybe the stories aren't as hot as they were once before, and suddenly he's no good, and we want Vince back, right? I think people love to make things a big deal when they're not necessarily the biggest deal. I think people love to criticize things just off the basis of criticizing. Um, and I think that speaks volumes for not only WWE but AEW as well. So when we get into the conversation about Vince buying back WWE, it's a very simple. TKO wouldn't allow it, right? TKO has no means of letting Vince come back. Vince has burned that bridge. That bridge has been, destroyed now. So I hear it. You take it at face value for what it is. Regardless of the fact, I think the simple answer is just knowing that it's not going to happen. So people can, work themselves up, and Jonathan Coachman can go viral. All these different things. Regardless of that fact, it's just not a realistic thing. Uh, we know Vince has the money, but overall, it doesn't really matter. That amount of money doesn't necessarily mean anything when TKO is fine, maybe not looking to sell the company. You know, WWE is selling out arenas no matter where they're going. So us on the internet, we have our feelings towards it. Really, it is what it is at the end of the day. Just it's not going to happen. Like you said, the damage has been done, and that bridge is burned. And regardless of that fact, you know, I don't think it's something that people have to worry about.
Yeah, I find it crazy too because initially people actually forget this aspect of it, but Vince sold to TKO with the initial plan of being in control to a certain extent, and that was one thing that was going to happen. But the allegations got worse, and as the allegations got worse, it was clearly at that point in time there was no way TKO could have ever kept him on board, and then that forced the sale completely, and everything just kind of transitioned. But it's so crazy to see that, because if the allegations didn't come out, maybe Vince would have never sold to begin with, right? But of
Yeah,
course, you got to have that conversation as to what would WWE look like right now with Vince McMahon running it. And I don't know if I necessarily believe WWE would have this hot period that they have. The ticket sales and everything, I do think, is a combination of great marketing and great tactics by TKO. And they're very money hungry, focused, and driven. And then, of course, you have Triple H, who is creatively just, he's been able to be successful creatively. Whether fans on internet will agree with that, that's up to them. It's subjective. It seems like it's always it's a fun trend for people to jump on whatever echo chamber exists, if it could generate views and things of that nature. But when you look at
yeah.
WWE creatively right now, it's far better than anything we got from Vince McMahon in the last 10, 15 years. So I don't
Oh,
even
absolutely.
I don't know who would actually even want to see Vince McMahon buy WWE back, and I don't really know. Just seeing how great TKO has been able to change, and the thing that I often hear is people are saying, with AEW or WWE, a common phrase that I hear is moving the goalpost back, and I hear that often. But really, what I love so much about professional wrestling today, and it's just the fact that the wrestling industry is so healthy. And I do
For sure.
think TKO is, yes, they are money driven, and they are definitely power hungry, and they're a team of hustlers, right? And they have a very, very instinctive attitude to just close down the ads, close down the deals, get these things popping, get tickets, more money, right? From a business perspective, from an entrepreneurship perspective, that is something I do love to see, because at the end of the day, that's how businesses thrive. You got to have that killer instinct. But
Absolutely.
I think that's actually led to the wrestling industry being healthier. I think some people will argue that it would kill wrestling, but I think when WWE is at its best, or when WWE is absolutely killing it, it kind of becomes an inspiration for other people to say, wow, companies that may would have stayed away from professional wrestling are now willing to invest in professional wrestling. TV networks are taking professional wrestling a little bit more serious. And I think that's one of the reasons why, Vince, yes, I will always give him his props for being smart and with streaming and understanding the shift, especially, with the Attitude Era back in the 90s. I just think Vince McMahon creatively doesn't offer any value to WWE or TKO. And TKO has pretty much figured out in a very quick period of time how to maximize the wrestling industry. Does that come at the expense of other companies? Sure. But I think that conversation needs to be had because they are genuinely killing it. And I think, one thing I wanted to kind of make a point about, Billy, too, is Jonathan Coachman has had a very interesting relationship historically with the WWE. And I find it to be frustrating sometimes when people go on these podcasts and talk about things of this kind of nature, because I am starting to see a response from the community in which they are coming out and talking about, like, I want Vince back. And after those allegations, how can you want that person back in the office? Not only that, right? Let's take that out of the equation. How can you want Vince McMahon back when creatively, for the previous 10 years, he was not that great of a booker?
Right.
And so I think that's where I've become really hesitant of ever, like, you cannot convince me otherwise. Like, Triple H is a better booker than Vince. And I think Triple H being a great booker is, whether people want to admit it, I think Triple H is forcing Tony Khan to improve. And wow, if AEW could really get back on track towards the end of this year, like, they're never going to beat WWE, but if they get on track creatively, they will always be good at, doing their thing. And that's okay. You don't need to beat the number one company, but you need to be competitive and stand toe to toe with them. And I think this is one of those situations where Vince would ultimately kill AEW, and WWE and TKO probably won't. They probably won't.
They're gonna force their hand to make them better.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
And by them making it better, listen, let's be real. WWE probably doesn't want to pay expensive contracts and stuff like that. And AEW forces WWE to do that. But on the flip side of that, the beauty of that is, what if there is a possibility one day where WWE can benefit from AEW's growth?
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
So
Absolutely.
never say never. I mean,
No.
WWE used to spoil TNA tapings on their website back in the day. Now they're working with them. So Vince buying WWE back, not necessarily a thing that I want to see, nor would it ever be a thing I would support. Forget about the allegations. Remove the allegations from the conversation. I think it is very clear that Vince McMahon was never going to be, he should not be booking,
No, especially at his late age and everything that's happening there.
Yeah.
I just don't think he necessarily has the touch anymore. We
Yeah.
can move on.
Absolutely. Now, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to everybody who is watching us live. With that being said, I want to turn our attention to something that was a really interesting topic. BillyTKO, today, there's been some news that have dropped regarding the future of NXT call-ups, and this one excited me especially because there's definitely been a lot of questions asked regarding what's happened this past weekend. Now, we will begin with one who I truly believe is a cornerstone of WWE, will be the future of WWE, could potentially main event WrestleManias, has the ability to do so, and has had the ability to do so for years. Let's turn our attention to Jordynne Grace. According to Corey Hayes of PWN, he has reported that Jordynne Grace is expected to be called up to WWE SmackDown. Now, Jordynne Grace was unsuccessful against Stephanie Vaquer. And this has obviously been a very, very highly debated conversation. Yesterday's news, if you guys watched WWE NXT, WWE had done the women's championship match between Stephanie Vaquer and JC Jane, and JC Jane had actually shocked the world. So now the report comes out that Jordynne Grace was not victorious at Battleground because of the fact that there is no plans for her to be in NXT any longer. Now, this is going to be a very fruitful conversation, I hope, because some people believe that Jordynne Grace should be champion and not JC Jane, and Jordynne Grace might be getting called up too early. With the news that Jordynne Grace is expected to move up to SmackDown, what is your initial reaction to that? And do you think WWE made the right call by having her lose to Stephanie Vaquer only to have JC Jane win in the main event of NXT?
Well, hear me. I mean, if Jordynne Grace is going up to SmackDown, then yes, I do believe that you did the right thing. I think if you're going to have JC Jane stay down on NXT, she's obviously in a very prominent storyline. Obviously, Fatal Influence has done some amazing things in the women's division down in NXT. I ultimately think it's right that you have Jordynne Grace and both her and Stephanie lose. Because you know that those women, they're going to go up to the main roster. They are going to play a prominent role on your show. Kind of like you said a moment ago, Jordynne Grace is a person that we could see potentially main eventing a WrestleMania. That's a woman who is, very, very above her skill level. You know what I mean? She is so beyond talented. So I ultimately think WWE is doing the right thing here by having her lose to Stephanie and letting Stephanie drop that title to JC. Because now it makes sense, right? When we watched it at Battleground, I was looking from a certain viewpoint saying like, "Oh, why would Jordynne lose here?" Why? Because I kind of figured, "Oh, Stephanie's definitely going to go up. They've, shown her on Raw, everything like that. It's only a matter of time until she's up on the main roster doing what it is she does." But now it makes sense because both women are going to go up. So yeah, I definitely think WWE made the right decision here.
So it's an interesting approach for WWE. And I'm curious, when you see Jordynne Grace, she comes in, the argument becomes that Jordynne Grace should immediately be on the main roster. And now the argument is she should be staying in NXT. So do you think this is a level of people being hypocrites where they just are looking to have some sort of outrage? Or do you think that's a very valid reaction from fans?
Brother, I believe all wrestling fans are a tad bit reactionary. I think MJF said it years ago, but they say one thing and then it turns like it's natural, right? Your opinions change. That's what it was. Your opinions change at the drop of a dime, which is true, right? So people are just being reactionary just to create a reactionary moment. And I do think in some senses, or in some ways, that is okay. Um, but yeah, people are hypocrites. If when she was coming in, it was, I can't believe she's going to NXT. I can't believe she's going to be doing everything down there. Now it's, oh, well, we should have let her win the NXT Women's Championship, but why is she going directly to the main roster now? Why does she deserve that spot, et cetera, et cetera? It's weird. It's weird outrage that doesn't necessarily need to take place, I think. So when I look at it from that viewpoint, it's like people are going to be loud. They're going to voice their opinions. They're going to say what they want. At the end of the day, Jordynne, I think, makes a lot of sense up on the main roster. And that's just my personal take on it.
Yeah, I would say that Jordynne Grace, well, two things. One, I think people need to normalize the idea of being able to change your opinion as more information comes out. So for those who believe
That
Jordynne
is
Grace,
okay. That is okay.
yeah. So I think one of the things too is like I understand where people are coming from. Hey, Jordynne Grace should stay in NXT, but I think Jordynne Grace is a future piece to the WWE puzzle. And I think one of the things for me personally that I've kind of had a hard time accepting with WWE in the past is that if you constantly call up talent without a plan, then you might as well just leave them in an NXT. And to see that WWE is approaching this with the mentality that they are pressing the reset button with NXT, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with them doing that. But they called up Roxanne. They called up Julia. I mean, you are calling up all of your top female talents from NXT. So I really just hope WWE has a plan here. Jordynne Grace going up to SmackDown is the right move, and I'm glad that WWE has that in the plans. I think it's really appropriate for Jordynne Grace to be on the main roster. But again, I think my concern is, do you have a plan for her? Because if not, then keep her in NXT. But it's very clear. JC Jane is the champion now because she's the vet and she is somebody who is safe and reliable to hold it down in NXT. But they called up Roxanne. They called up Julia. They're calling up Jordynne Grace. They're calling up all of this top talent. And if you don't have a plan, then you're effectively hurting NXT. So I'm just hoping that WWE has planned this out thoughtfully. I'm hoping that WWE has a plan in place so that way when Jordynne Grace does go up to SmackDown, she is not just doing anything. She's got to be doing something special. Whether it's for a title or not, it doesn't matter, but you got to treat her very special. And that's why I recommend Jordynne Grace should be moved to SmackDown and immediately become a threat and take the United States Women's Championship belt off of Zelina Vega. Give her the Gunther treatment. Give her the Gunther treatment until it is time for her to become world champion. And I think if WWE does that, it will be the right move. But I think she is going to be an amazing asset to the main roster. Now, does it come at the expense of NXT?
Yeah, I guess that's true. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's all you talked about the Gunther and Zelina Vega and Jordynne Grace thing. I definitely think that Jordynne is going to need that treatment. I think she's going to need it immediately. I think you have to make her a big deal. You have to set that precedence that she is important.
Yeah. And I think not only is that very valid, but I think this is a time to see how the NXT women climb to the occasion because Jordynne Grace is, being moved up to SmackDown. And a couple of weeks ago on my channel, I had actually spoken about Lola Vice is also expected to be moved up to SmackDown. And Lola Vice is not won gold in NXT. So you're going to have Carmen Petrovich and Kendall Gray. And, obviously you have the girl from LFG. You have talent that are going to be coming in, new faces, but the question now becomes who is really going to step up and hold it down. And I think that's going to be very interesting to see how Shawn Michaels maneuvers around that. However, that's actually going to bring us to our next topic. On the counterpart of Jordynne Grace being moved to SmackDown, Corey Hayes has also reported that Stephanie Vaquer is expected to be called up to WWE Raw, which obviously would make sense considering the fact that Stephanie Vaquer just dropped the title on NXT. So it comes out that Stephanie Vaquer is going to WWE Raw. She drops the belt. Similar situation to Jordynne Grace, moving up to SmackDown. Is this an opportunity where WWE will take advantage of the AAA acquisition and they're immediately going to put Stephanie Vaquer, in some top storylines, feuds? Or do you see Stephanie mixing it up, with Rhea Ripley, Kairi Sane, Io Sky? Like, what do you think is going to happen with Stephanie Vaquer going up to the main roster?
So, okay, my thought process is that she's going to be she's going to be what's the word that I'm looking for? She's going to be like launched directly into that main event scene. And maybe that's a hot take to some. Maybe she should just go challenge for the, Women's Intercontinental Championship. I definitely think that she's going to play a very big part in that main event scene with the likes of Rhea Ripley, Liv Morgan, everybody up there in that more prominent role in that picture. Kairi Sane, Io Sky. The reason why I think that is because of everything that she has currently done on NXT. If you look at the presentation of Stephanie Vaquer, you would know that everything about her speaks main event. It doesn't speak like, oh, look at me down here. It's look at me up here, right? Everything about her presentation is absolutely outstanding, and I think that that's one of the big thing that WWE focuses on, and that's truly what creates a star sometimes is presentation. And hers is everything. She has the look, she has the charisma, she has the entrance, she has everything of a main event player. So I definitely can see a world where WWE just kind of instantly launches her into that main event scene, gets her up there with the likes of Io Sky, and she's challenging for the Women's World Championship. I'll say no less than 3 to 6 months.
Wow. It's an interesting idea because Jordynne Grace moving to SmackDown, Julia moving to SmackDown, Tiffany Stratton's on SmackDown. Now Raw and SmackDown are so loaded and not everybody can have a championship. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they kind of maneuver around that. Definitely excited to see how they go about this. Now, one of the things that also does have to be said when it comes to Stephanie Vaquer is they did in fact confirm a match for her at Worlds Collide. So she'll be in a tag team match with Lola Vice, which, technically speaking, Worlds Collide is a show between, Raw, SmackDown, NXT, AAA, and TNA. So it's going to be very interesting. Will she be on the main roster beforehand, or are they going to make that change after the fact? Would you like to see Stephanie Vaquer on the next episode of Raw, or do you think they should kind of hold off on this until the time is right?
Well, I think, truth be told, I'd probably wait till after the Money in the Bank. I think you wait till that following week, and then you kind of let her get that fresh start, and you kind of do what you did with Penta, right? Kind of a little no different than let her go on, get a couple wins, kind of introduce her into that big audience, and really get her involved and in the mix. Maybe within that third or fourth week. You know what I'm saying? Maybe you give her a startup feud, then you kind of you bleed her in a little bit more into the stories. So yeah, no, I would actually be okay with them holding off till after Worlds Collide and Money in the Bank, then putting her on Raw. Give her some time away from TV to let her take because she's obviously got that match at Worlds Collide. Let her go do that. Um, Come up to Raw, start fresh. Yeah, that's how I would do it personally.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way. I'm scared that maybe WWE could be doing too much too soon, especially with so much stuff currently happening. The good thing with like Roxanne, for example, she's been moved up to Raw, but then of course she's kind of in the mix with the Judgment Day, so there's not necessarily this like pressure for her to be a champion. Julia is going to be in Money in the Bank, which is phenomenal. We're gonna kind of see how they go about this, because Julia and Stephanie clearly coming in at the same time, a lot of hype, international standouts. And it's inevitable. Zarya eventually going to run NXT and then get called up, and that's another international talent. Meanwhile, you have Jordynne Grace being called up. It just seems like there is so much stuff that is happening. I'm curious to see how WWE goes about this moving forward. Now, that is quite the lineup of talent getting called up. And by the way, we still don't even know who else will get called up, which I think is so fascinating, because now we are at a point where we have a very, very big potential summer for WWE. I think that is very clear. I think if you look at WWE currently as it stands, with all the talent being called up, AAA being bought out, there are some rumors of more and more things happening. I am so curious to see how WWE is going to juggle it all, because this is one of those times where, you know, SmackDown might be moving to 2 hours and you still have a lot of stuff to balance. Like, this is a tricky situation, not to mention they've also brought back Rusev and Aleister Black and you know, how about Ricky Saints? He dropped the North American Championship to Ethan Page. Ethan Page is going to have a phenomenal match at Worlds Collide with Laredo Kid, Rey Fenix, Javon Evans. But does that mean Ricky Saints gets called up to the main roster, right? So you got to kind of wonder, how does WWE do all of this while so much is already going on? I'm hoping this leads to WWE doing something massive. And I know this is going to sound very, very interesting to some people, but with WWE having AAA, I would like to see Stephanie Vaquer. I know, I understand this is kind of odd considering she didn't come from AAA, but I would kind of like to see Stephanie Vaquer be like a hybrid talent between AAA and WWE. So that way, until that main event slot is officially open for business, she could still be a very integrated part of WWE programming. What do you think of that, Billy?
I would actually be perfectly fine with that. I do question it a little bit, because I obviously, here's the thing, if your plan is to move somebody into the main event scene, I think it's a little bit risky to have them, you know, working elsewhere. I get it. It's still under your umbrella and you're still protecting them. I'm fully aware of that. But I think at the end of the day, you know, it really is just like, you want to protect your top talent. So while I agree it would be really cool to see her work AAA, I just think you want to protect her and make sure, like, hey, nothing's going to happen, because we do have big plans for you in the future. So again, that's why I say just have her go to Raw, and you go let her have, you know, a couple one-on-one matches, you know, just kind of do the same thing you did with Penta and let her build up a story into, and then push her to the main event scene. That's just personally what I would do. Although I do love the idea.
No, I agree. Definitely some really, really good points made there, and I'm excited to see how they go about this. Honestly, I think this is going to be a very interesting time period for WWE. You know, they're loading it up with content, signings. They're doing a lot. How they manage it will determine how good or bad the product is. I sometimes say you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. So we're going to see how big WWE's mouth is, because if they can chew, look at this roster, it's stacked, you know, and it's important that they create those stories. It's important that they, you know, my biggest gripe that I've had about WWE, and I've said millions of times on this channel, is the fact that under Vince McMahon's era, NXT call-ups haven't been that great. Thankfully, Triple H has found a role for Grayson Waller, for Austin Theory, for Solo Sikoa, for so many people that came through from NXT. Gunther, like, we could go on and on and on. So I am curious to see how they propose that. But I think this is a perfect way to segue into our next news story, which is the fact that WWE is expected to have NXT, TNA, and AAA stars expected to participate for WWE Evolution 2, which is interesting because on yesterday's episode, Tuesday, May 27, 2025. We spoke about some leaked plans for Evolution 2, which included Bayley and potentially a match with Becky. Now today, WrestleVotes has confirmed that WWE is looking to stack the show entirely, and one of the ways to do that would be by including TNA and AAA stars for Evolution 2. Now, of course, this is an interesting topic because Evolution 2 has a couple challenges. They will be competing with a Beyonce concert, and then of course there's going to be a lot of fans who might be flying to Texas so they can watch AEW All In that weekend. Evolution 2, smaller arena, but it is an all women's pay-per-view. When you hear the news that this could be something bigger, like a Worlds Collide event, but for the women, what do you think? WWE taking the approach of making Evolution 2 a multi-promotional event. Is this WWE being desperate to sell tickets? Is this WWE doing what's best for the wrestling industry? What is your reaction to something of this nature?
Well, I think you get a mix of both, right? Like, not only is okay, so on the surface, like, it looks like, oh, they're just desperate. They're trying to sell tickets. WWE could sell tickets regardless. They don't need AAA and TNA to sell the tickets. I'm here to tell you guys. I'm just going to say it up front. But regardless of that fact, I think, again, we talk about a healthy wrestling business, right? This is one way to continue that healthy wrestling business. And the cool thing about it is it's just another version of Worlds Collide, right? Except you're doing it with the women, and it's all women. So, to say like, oh yeah, WWE, look at them. They're doing everything that they can to just, bite off everything that they can and get a piece of the pie no matter where they can. No, they're doing Worlds Collide. It's the same thing. It's just this time they're doing it with the women. So I think, again, we go back to the idea of like, I like the idea of it. I'm just going to be upfront and honest. Like, I am not, and, I'm in no way, shape, or form saying this is wrong. But regardless of that fact, I think it would be enjoyable. I think it adds to the talent pool. For a pay-per-view that you could expect, 4 or 5 matches out of, maybe you get 7 or 8. You know what I mean? Maybe you get a longer pay-per-view when you have all 3 of these companies working together. Like, there's a lot of cool things that can come out of it. So I'm definitely in favor of, TNA, AAA, and WWE all working together. Obviously, there's a heavy partnership happening between all 3 of these companies. So, if that's the case, let it happen. You know what I mean? We seen it last night on NXT. As we start to build towards Worlds Collide, you're starting to see, Worlds Collide shape. And, like, it's enjoyable. It's fun to watch. If you're going to sit here and tell me that you didn't enjoy, like somebody like Laredo Kid on your TV, then I'm here to tell you you're probably lying to yourself, because that's not true. And especially if you haven't seen him wrestle, I promise when you do, you're going to enjoy it. I'm not going to go too much longer here. I'm just going to say that yes, the simple answer is yes, I would enjoy it.
So now let me ask you a question, because I think this is where it could get really tricky. It could get really messy. But when you look at Evolution, you want to put on matches that carry your specific women's division over. So the only thing that I can see, which would be nice, would be for WWE to have the TNA Knockouts Championship featured as a singles match. Perhaps maybe Natalya could be one. Natty Neidhart, who has been killing it in GCW and NWA, right? I think that would be really unique. But other than that, I think the only way this truly works is if these talents are just special surprises for a battle royal. Because I really don't want, like, this is my gripe here, right? And maybe you guys will agree or disagree in the chat. Please feel free to engage. But Billy, we just talked about Stephanie, Julia, Roxanne, Jordynne Grace, everybody getting called up to the main roster. Yes, you could do 6, 7, maybe even 8 matches total on this card. But how are you going to make everybody feel important and then also try to promote other promotions? I think the only way they can do that is have a battle royal, which you can have plenty of women from NXT, plenty of women from TNA, plenty of women from AAA, and that would be your big multi-promotional event. And then aside from that, you got to have your US Championship, your Intercontinental Championship, both World Championships, Women's Tag Team Championships, North American Women's Championship, NXT Women's Championship. That's 6 matches right there. You do a Battle Royal, that's 7. So what would you do for the 8th match? Well, then Bayley and Becky, if it's non-title, is your 8th match. Or if Becky wins the Intercontinental Championship at Money in the Bank, then maybe that is the 8th match. That's a singles match for a non-title. So then the question is, do you have the TNA Women's Championship, Knockouts Championship on the line? Because I would like to see TNA get that opportunity. We saw Joe Hendry defend on a pay-per-view. It would be cool to see the women. But now let me ask you this. Because of the fact that WWE has to, if you're going to do any sort of singles match with multi-promotional cross-promotion here, you got to have somebody of name value. I'm not sure if there's somebody in TNA who currently has the name value. I know the one recognizable name to many would be Tessa Blanchard, but there is a stain currently on Tessa Blanchard where maybe WWE wouldn't feel comfortable about that. So let me ask you, is there any talent you would want to see from another company appear in a singles match? Or would you just say, hey, screw it, let's put them in a battle royal and that's fine enough?
Obviously TNA and, AAA, the rosters are very, talented, right? The thing about it is like, for a casual viewer, not many people, and this is going to sound so messed up because I'm only talking from a casual audience. I want people to understand that before I say what I say. The rosters are still not fully recognizable or heard of. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe to that mainstream audience, people may not recognize a face from TNA, or they may not recognize a face from AAA. Um, and I just have to say that that's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's the idea that WWE is trying to create here. They're trying to create a wrestling business where you guys do recognize their faces, where you guys do go watch TNA, or you do tune into AAA. So I think I would be okay with just the battle royal in allowing these ladies to appear, allowing them to show up on that show, giving them that platform, giving them that opportunity to where they can maybe do a really cool spot. Now, the thing about it is you make that battle royal special, right? We talked about it a little bit yesterday when it came down to stipulations, creating stipulations inside of these things. Maybe a number one contender match for in this battle royal. Like, there's so many options that WWE can take here. But not only that, it's a great opportunity for all women involved if you do that battle royal, because WWE, they could do 7 matches and they'll do 7 matches. You know what I mean? If they want to do 5, they'll do 5. If they want to do 10, they'll do 10. At the end of the day, it's just going to be up to them and what they choose to do. But me personally, I would prefer just to see the battle royal, and then you get all your titles defended on that show. And then, like you said, if you wanted to, if you really, really wanted to, you could have that Knockouts Championship defended. That was if you really wanted to, because obviously, like you said a moment ago, you did what you did for Joe Hendry. You allow the same thing to happen for the TNA Knockouts Championship.
Yeah, and really one thing too is I'm not a big fan of long pay-per-views, right? However, WWE doing an all-women's pay-per-view, they don't do it often. They've only done it once before. I fully support the idea, the notion that they go ahead and stack this as much as they want, because we might not see them do this long term. We might not see Evolution every year. But I really want them to do well with ticket sales, because I think that would send the right message that women's wrestling could actually draw. They have a plethora of fantastic women on the roster. And the only other request that I would have from WWE in this particular pay-per-view, if you are going to do a battle royal and you are going to highlight TNA and AAA to some extent, let's bring in somebody from Marigold, and let's also bring in somebody from Evolve. Whether it be Zeta Steel or Kylie Ray, like, let's bring in somebody from Evolve as well. That allows you to promote Tubi in the Evolve show, but also, who do you think is going to be the future from Evolve? Highlight that person a little bit. Let's get a glimpse of the future too. We know this is going to be stacked with the stars. We know Charlotte and Tiffany and Nia Jax and so many women are going to be on this card, but let's not forget about who the future of this company is. And, if you're going to do a battle royal, have Jada Parker go in there and have her kill it and show the world why maybe she should be the next women's champion of NXT. That's what I want to see. I want them to really highlight the women, not only because yes, you're probably going to have your legends and the Bella Twins, and you're probably going to bring Trish back or Alita or something to some sort of extent, right? You're going to
Mhm.
stack the show, but let's not forget that the long-term play should be developing stars of the future. And if you do a battle royal, hey, maybe that's where Jordynne Grace wins. And I think you said the key word absolutely correctly: stipulations. Number one contendership. Imagine this is like, we don't have Queen of the Ring this year, but you win this battle royal and you can be victorious, and it can mean something. That's what I would like to see personally, but definitely interesting to see that WWE is going to make Evolution a multi promotion event. I think that's a very good thing for the wrestling industry. It's also a very good thing for WWE and for the women. But I do want to switch gears a little bit. Billy, there is a very interesting story. I don't want to spend too long talking about this, but I thought this would be a healthy conversation. At least I'm hoping. It has come out that AEW stars believe AEW pay-per-views are too long. And it's funny because I was just talking about Evolution, where I don't typically like pay-per-views too long. However, PW Insider has come out with a new report today that suggests that AEW stars, based on who they've spoken to, believe that is one of like the negative things about the company, being that the pay-per-views are too long in duration. And so, this has obviously become a very debated topic, especially with Double or Nothing going so late. When you hear about this, and you see this is something that's constantly being talked about, why do you think Tony Khan has yet to make the change to simplify the pay-per-views?
Well, here's the thing, right? I think Tony, regardless of, contrary to belief, I think he is under the belief still that he's doing right by the fans. And when I say that, I mean, he feels like he's giving them their money's worth. And he feels like if he's dwindling that card down less than what it is, then it probably at some point maybe feels like you're stealing. Now, while that can be true, if it is what maybe we had gotten before, because Double or Nothing, it wasn't my cup of tea all the way around, but it wasn't the worst thing I've ever seen. You know what I mean? Um, but beforehand, there have been, a grass couple of bad pay-per-views. So if you're giving me that for $50 and maybe you're giving me 6 out of 12 matches and those 6 matches stories are just horrible, then yeah, maybe I'm going to feel like you're robbing me a little bit, right? But if you're going out there and you're putting on 6, 7, 8 matches and those all mean something and there is something involved with those, then maybe, people won't complain so much, number one, about paying that $50 pay-per-view price. And on top of that, it's going to make your show more enjoyable because at the end of the day, especially doing them on Sundays, people have to work the next day. People have things that they have to do, and you're asking me to stay up till almost 1 in the morning. It's just one of those things where it's like, if you find a way to create and make your stories better, dude, don't be afraid to do 6 matches and charge $50 because there's a chance that people will buy them. I know that sounds crazy, but if your stories are good, people will buy in. Now, I'm not saying that's, the truth for everybody or whatever the case is, but I definitely think that there would be people out there, that would.
I think I'm going to defend AEW for a second. Honestly, I'm going to defend them for a second. They charge a lot of money for a pay-per-view, and they're trying to give fans their money's worth.
Absolutely.
It's not for me. It wasn't for me for WWE when they were doing long pay-per-views. I think it's so tough for WWE and AEW because they both have a different approach to PLEs, pay-per-views. WWE, they run commercials on their PLEs, with Peacock, for at least for us American users, and for AEW, they don't run commercials, but they have several more matches and they let matches go a lot longer. I understand why AEW does it. I get it. They're charging $50 for a pay-per-view. I think when you look at the grand scheme of things, though, you can still take away 2-3 matches and let the rest really shine. I think that's been my biggest gripe about AEW pay-per-views for the longest time is they're very, very long. And I think, it's such a tough situation because if AEW stars are saying this, wrestling fans are saying this, wrestling media are saying this, there's obviously a reason why Tony Khan is not pivoting from this decision. And I think that's probably the only reason why. And I think it just has to come down with Tony Khan feels like he's giving people more bang for his buck. But it's very tough for me to get excited about AEW pay-per-views naturally knowing how long they're going. I like Sunday
Yeah.
pay-per-views. I actually think pay-per-views, all wrestling pay-per-views should be on Sunday. I actually agree that WWE should move their pay-per-views off of Saturday and go to Sunday. I don't like Saturday pay-per-views. So I'm actually in the minority. Like, go ahead, do them on Sunday nights. But you're asking people to watch a pre-show. You're asking people to watch 10 to 13 matches. And then you're also asking for their attention to watch a media scrum, which we don't know how long they'll actually go for. So I feel like we've kind of hit this thing where WWE is guilty of this too with their pre-shows and their media scrums. You are asking a lot of time being dedicated to your product on a weekend. And, you know, the argument on Sunday, people who have kids got to go to school, whatever it may be. I get that. That's not an impact to me. So selfishly, that's why I like Sundays, you know. But
Yeah.
to have those long pay-per-views, I think the two things that really hurt is the first match, second match, third match, fourth match, all could be really good. By the end of the night, people are going to be tired. And naturally, that's one of the risks that you have with doing these long pay-per-views. When you do these long pay-per-views and people are like, wow, man, like every match is good, but now I'm tired. Yeah, that's kind of a problem. You gotta think of a retention mechanism to keep people going. And I don't think good wrestling matches or good wrestling stories can do that. I think naturally people have things to do outside of wrestling. So, you know, the fact that AEW stars believe this, the wrestling media believes this, the wrestling fans mostly believe this, you know, for PW Insider to come out with that report, I think that's just a clear indication that AEW should probably make a change. And I'm not saying they have to do 5 matches like WWE. You know, if you're going to do 7 to 8 matches, that's fine. But if you're going to do an hour or 2 hour long pre-show and then you're going to do these matches and then you're going to do a media scrum, you got to get people off the air by 11 p.m. And Eastern time. And I think that's maybe one welcome change I would prefer from AEW. Start your pay-per-view an hour earlier. You know, there's no reason why a pay-per-view should go after midnight and then you're asking us to watch a media scrum, you know, and I get it, we're a small sample size, but one thing that I've seen from the viewers of YouTube, people have said, man, it just sucks. Like you watch the entire pre-show, then you watch the matches, you watch the card, you want to watch the media scrum, and then, by the way, I want to watch my favorite YouTuber live. You know, like I've seen people say that, like I want to watch my favorite content of people talking about it. It's like now you've dedicated 8 hours to a show. It's a small sample size compared to the grand scheme of the audience, but I'm just saying, you know, it's like, well, if you actually made the pay-per-view a little bit earlier, it works out in your favor. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why when they do international shows, we saw with WWE doing Australia, like 5 a.m. Eastern time, or Saudi Arabia, 2 p.m. or whatever. Like I actually like those shows because by 4 o'clock I'm done and then I go enjoy the rest of my day. But I do think it would be a welcome change if they just kind of shorten it. And actually, I think their pay-per-view quality will be better for the change. Do you agree? Do you think their pay-per-view quality, if they shorten it a little bit, do you think people will probably enjoy it a little bit more?
For sure. That's what I was just saying a minute ago. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you take 6 of those, and I think I may have, messed up the wording a little bit ago, but if you take 6 of those best matches that you have on your card and you make that the pay-per-view, yeah, dude, people are going to feel so much better about buying your pay-per-view. They're going to feel rewarded for buying your pay-per-view. If everything is moving in a constant pace and it's moving and flowing correctly, then yeah, people are going to be happy with that, man. That's just how it is. And I think, like you said, AEW, man, they could really benefit from doing something like this. And I don't think you'll see a lot of people complain. I don't. Because one of the biggest things is that people tend to complain about these pay-per-views. And that's, a huge gripe on, why AEW maybe gets the reaction sometimes that they do online. So imagine cutting that out. Man, people are going to feel a lot better about your show. Imagine you have, Anarchy in the arena. You have Hangman and Will Ospreay. You have, maybe a couple other matches on top of that. And you let those, 6 matches tell the story of your pay-per-view. Dude, I'll buy it for $50 knowing I'm getting a mix of so many different things just out of 6 matches. Yeah, count me in, man.
Yeah, and I just think if you have less matches and they're all given great amount of time, dude, I think things are able to be they're able to be digested a little bit easier too, which ultimately improves the quality. And it's just like I said, it was a huge thing. I remember one point And WWE still does it with WrestleMania, but it's like this year I enjoyed WrestleMania, but I didn't sit through I didn't sit through the pre-show this year. You know, I made that a
I
major
didn't either.
change. I made that a major change this year. I said I'm not watching the pre-show. Now, if you have matches on the pre-show, it's a little bit different. And that's obviously what AEW does. But I think like I'm not a big fan of it. I feel like they are already requesting so much of our time and attention 7 days a week. And you know, believe it or not, from a wrestling standpoint, like a wrestling content creator standpoint, the more they give us to talk about, the more ability that we actually have to kind of, you know, make a living off of it, right? But if you give us less, maybe it's less to talk about. It's just an interesting thing. Obviously, AEW talent feel a certain way about it. I think if they understand that, people see it, everybody collectively agrees. I would like to see Tony Khan make this change. And personally speaking, one final point that I'll make about this before we move on, I just want to make it very clear. In order for AEW to get into the good graces of all wrestling fans, you have to realize that the thing that makes shows special is the quantity, not the quantity, but the quality, right? If everybody in AEW has these great moments and these great spots and these high flying moments and all these things, they all kind of do it. What really stands out other than the main event? But if you have a smaller card, each match kind of in its own way feels special. And I think that NXT TakeOver approach was one of the best changes that Triple H made to the main roster because you have 5 matches on a card and they feel special. Now, on the flip side of that, when WWE does 4 or 5 matches on a pay-per-view and then they have a talk show segment like they've done in the past, that really grinds my gears because now I just feel like I'm watching a more premium version of Raw or SmackDown. So
Yeah.
let's try to minimize the talk segments. You know, you could have your segments backstage and you know, ringside interviews, whatever, but don't give us like no Miz TV type of thing, you know, whatever.
Not on a pay-per-view. Definitely not.
Yeah. Very interesting. So I think now would be a great time to kind of talk to our audience and see what the Ango Show audience has been saying. We've had a plethora of super chats come in. It looks like we've actually reached our super chat goal. Guys, for the next several minutes, we're going to talk about whatever you guys are talking about. So get your super chats in before the stream and the show concludes. I'm very excited to see some of these super chats because I know it's been a very, very big week for professional wrestling. And of course, when it's a big week for professional wrestling, that means the fans love to talk about it. And I'm very excited to see what we have here. So kicking things off today with a super chat, we have Tolino Channel who dropped 100 Indian rupees. Billy, Tolino Channel says, a single episode that gave the shock factor, good matches, video package, and promo, massive build to a pay-per-view, reset button to refresh the product. It sounds like Tolino Channel is talking about NXT from last night, which we saw a variety of things happen. It looks like maybe Tatum Paxley could be joining the culling. It looks like JC Jane is going to hold things down as women's champion. It looks like Jasper Troy is going to be a very big threat to the men's division. And it looks like they're already building to him and Obafemi, which is a very fascinating idea. And then, of course, I think we have to have that conversation. Ricky Saints, he's dropped the belt to Ethan Page. It was a very loaded NXT. I know you were doing a watch along. Can you tell me a little bit about the reaction that you had to yesterday's episode and maybe what your audience was saying as you were watching it with them?
Start with the JC Jane thing. Obviously, like everybody was shocked about that. I remember I was speechless in the moment. Like you can literally go back, watch my reaction, and you could go back, read the chat, look at their reaction, because everybody kind of had the same one of like just jaws on the floor. Can't believe what we're seeing here, because you never would have guessed it, right? So we obviously had that. That was such a cool, shocking moment. And I think I said it in the watch along yesterday. Is like WWE thrives on those shocking moments. They always have. You know, shock factor is everything to WWE, and them doing that is just. And you talked about it a little bit ago. NXT just has always been that place where WWE is willing to take a couple more risks. You know what I mean? Try some different things out. Don't be afraid to. So you've seen that. Obviously, you're starting to see the build towards Worlds Collide. You're getting Javon Evans, Laredo Kid, Ray Phoenix, and Ethan Page all at Worlds Collide in a Fatal 4-Way match for the NXT North American Championship match. Like, seeing Ray Phoenix come out and Laredo Kid both seeing them both come out on NXT was very, very shocking, something that none of us anticipated or expected. Nobody would have ever guessed it. So that was, very interesting. Then on top of that, not only obviously we had the Ricky Saints thing and Ethan Page, but I'll get to that. But one of the most shocking things to me of the night was how good Trick Williams and Mike Santana were in the ring. Those two absolutely killed it. And if, we've talked about it a little bit in my chat. Mike Santana is definitely going to end up the TNA World Champion, and I do believe it'll happen at Slammiversary. It was just so cool. It was like it was one of those pinch me in my dreaming moments, because if you've been a long time watcher of TNA, you obviously know the history of Mike Santana. You've seen what he did in AEW, him going back to TNA as a singles guy, going out there and just being outstanding on this main event run. I mean, I know me personally, as somebody who enjoyed the proud and powerful tag team, Ortiz and Santana, and then has enjoyed his current work in TNA. It's just one of those moments where you look at it and you're like, man, like this, you're just proud of the dude. You know what I mean? Um, and then, yeah, Ricky Saints, Ethan Page, stellar, 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 stellar. And it leaves you questioning. Ricky Saints lost the title. What next? What's next?
Yeah.
Are they just going to move him up? They moved up Jordynne Grace fast. That's the plan.
Yeah. I wanna honestly chime in here because I have a very, this might be controversial, to be honest. It might be. I think NXT is the best weekly wrestling television show that exists. I think it is the most consistent. I think they give you shock factor. I think they give you good matches. I think they do really good character development. Yes, I do think sometimes they have the cringy backstage segments, but when it comes to, from top to bottom, the women's division, the men's division, the tag team division, everything seems to be hyper focused. And it's so nice and refreshing to see that NXT consistently delivers. And I think this is one of the biggest reasons why I love NXT so much. You see a young guy like Jasper Troy getting an opportunity, and immediately they're positioning him to be a big deal coming from LFG. But also on the same side, you have Ricky Saints and Ethan Page going out there delivering an absolute banger. And then you also have JC Jane shocking the world and beating Stephanie Vaquer. Nobody saw that coming. Like, NXT kind of gives everybody something to love, right? I think it's the most well-rounded wrestling TV show, and I very much enjoy Raw, and there's things I like about SmackDown, and there's things I like about Dynamite, but when it comes to pure consistency from top to bottom, I genuinely love NXT, and I think some people are shocked to hear that, but I mean, 2,000 videos later, it's what's the common trend when I say with NXT? It's how much I enjoy the fact that they are developing. And I think Shawn Michaels NXT is very reminiscent of the old days, which makes me a lot happier. It's not a super indie fest, and you have a mix of everything to satisfy everybody's needs. I genuinely believe it's the best weekly television show, and that might anger some people, but I love it.
Agreed. I say it all the time, man. NXT is hands down, top to bottom, best show. Very simple. Not sure if that's a scorching hot take or not.
Yeah. With that being said, I do want to say thank you to Tolino Channel for the super chat. Brian McCaddy coming through with $2. He says, at his age, would Vince live long enough to succeed? Now, Billy, Vince McMahon is not getting any younger. Earlier, we talked about him potentially wanting to buy back WWE. We, at one point, did not even factor in his age. So what is your thoughts on that? Because I'm just going to put it out there. I don't want to see Vince involved in the wrestling business at all. But do you think he would get involved knowing how old he is?
I mean, I mentioned it for a moment. I definitely said with him getting older. But like, dude, I just don't want to see it. Like, there's like no other way to put it. No, I do not want to see this gentleman involved in the wrestling business. Yes, I do believe that age plays a factor. I think he may be in touch money wise, and you're always looking for the next dollar. I do not think he's in touch with us, the audience. That
Yeah.
was the problem with Vince. Always, he was no longer in touch with us. Back in the '90s, in the Attitude Era, that was a different time. That was a different era. People enjoyed it then. Obviously, so be it. That's what it was then. But it's 2025. We're not living in 1997 anymore. Regardless of that fact, like Brian said, Vince is only getting older. Um, I don't think he needs to be doing anything in the wrestling business. And Vince says it all the time. He was never in the wrestling business. He was in the entertainment business. Okay.
Yeah, very interesting, and I think you're pretty spot on. And one thing I just want to put out there, because I feel like I've said this before, but I don't know what's with everybody's infatuation with having a whole bunch of old men in suits dictating the decisions that impact a lot of younger people and stuff. You know, whether it's the people that run the country or corporations or whatever. I think you got to be connected to what the people truly want, and I think Vince McMahon is truly out of touch. And I think to a certain extent, I'll give Tony Khan his props. Like, Tony Khan doesn't create a product that caters to me anymore, but I think Tony Khan is at least young enough to understand and have this mental like ability to say, hey, listen, this is what my audience wants. This is what the other people want. I'm going to try to find a way to make it work for everybody. I think Vince was always just that guy, like a typical old guy who's like, I'm doing it my way and that's it. And I'm happy to see that there are people like Carlos Silva, who is the president of TNA, guys like Triple H and Tony Khan, where they are relatively younger in comparison, and they say, listen, I might not have my finger on the pulse entirely, but I'm smart enough to know that social media is the wave. Let's take a look at social media. I'm smart enough to know the trends of the younger people, and I think Vince McMahon, just at his age, doesn't really get it. Yes, he understood that the shift was going to go from TV to streaming, but deep down inside, Vince McMahon's booking philosophies was definitely not for the younger people. And that's just kind of one of the ways I feel about that. So very interesting. Shout out to Brian McCaddy for the super chat. Justin Kennington came through with a $4.99. He says, I think Jordynne Grace, Ethan Page, Stephanie Vaquer, and Trick Williams will get called up. I agree with this, except Trick Williams is the TNA World Champion. He's got something cooking with Mike Santana. I think he is still a little bit green, but I think this program with TNA is going to allow him to learn a little bit more and get a little bit more experience. Eventually he'll get called up, but I think I largely agree with this list. Jordynne Grace, SmackDown, Ethan Page, Stephanie Vaquer, and Trick. I also have to throw in Ricky Saints. Otherwise, why did you have him drop the North American Championship? Well, I was just going to say, one thing that you need to keep in mind there is Fatal 4-Way match doesn't need to get pinned. It's an easy way for him to put over Javon. I think it would probably more than likely be Javon Evans winning that match, but that's going to be that's an interesting point.
Yeah. So, but kind of going into the Trick Williams thing, this may be a hot take. I was very adamant, and it's so funny because we talked earlier about opinions changing sometimes, which I do think it's okay as long as you're coming from a good place, right? Trick Williams has grown on me a tad bit. I was very adamant about him being green, right? I was, because when he was starting this heel run, right? I wasn't sure. I was like, man, I don't know if I like it, right? As I sit here today, I sing a different praise. Him saying, like, oh, you were cheering Average Joe, da da da. It just works for Trick Williams. It really does. I think the heel character does come a little more natural to him rather than the babyface character. So while I do think there is still some green there, I do think that it won't be long until he's ready. Especially if you have him go up as the heel character Trick. So that's just my personal take. I love what him and Mike Santana are doing. I already. All it took was one moment, and that's when I knew. I was like, okay. When Trick didn't back down, I was like, okay, there's something here that's working and something's clicking. And yes, Mike Santana helps, but Trick Williams is also helping on his end, right? You look at both parties and you're like, okay, something is working here. So I don't know, really cool, super excited. I could definitely see Trick going up. If not with this round of call-ups, maybe within the next one.
Yeah, and one point to make too is Trick was mostly babyface throughout his NXT run, so he needed to kind of learn how to become a heel because it's going to be a good thing, you know, obviously when he gets to the main roster. But I do think he should be a babyface when he comes up to the main roster. And I think that's why they're actually doing this. I think they're working with him to develop a heel persona, get that experience. It's not like Trick Williams had this massive background as like this super over the elite indie wrestler, you know what I mean? So that's going to be very interesting to pay attention to. Shout out to Justin Kennington for the super chat. Sharon Dye dropped 2 super chats for $1.99. She did not leave a comment, but thank you to Sharon Dye for the support. Jay Henry stopping by with $1.99. He says, I think we get EO Vaquer conclusion at SummerSlam. So that would be fascinating. I think that would be a very fun matchup. You know, I love the idea of more international talent coming into WWE and AEW. I would like to see more international talent get that exposure, more international talent get that contract, and really become a big name, right? This is one of those things where EO Vaquer could be such a great feud, such a great storyline, and I would definitely love to see that. I would also like to argue that maybe EO doesn't even have the belt by SummerSlam. We got to pay attention to Money in the Bank, right? I think Money in the Bank this year is going to be a quick one. I think whoever wins Money in the Bank is going to be trying to cash in fast. So we'll see how WWE positions themselves there. Shout out to Jay Henry for the super chat. Paul David coming through with a $5 super chat. He says, hello, gentlemen. Thoughts on last night's Knicks versus Pacers game? I can't offer any insight here because I did not watch, so I don't even know who won. But that's because I'm a Pistons fan, and, well, that's just kind of how it is. Billy, did you watch the game?
I didn't watch, but I definitely kept up. Yeah, as a Pistons fan, it's just hard to see either of these teams win.
Yeah.
But I do like Tyrese Halliburton. He made history last night. That man is super special, and I think that must be talked about. So big shout out to the Pacers. I will say, because the Knicks beat the Pistons this year, this is gonna harm me to say, but as a Pistons fan, I guess I'll root for the Pacers here.
Yeah. Okay.
That's tough to say. I didn't even like spilling that out.
Yeah, well, you know, Triple H was in attendance, and he got a lot of love. TNT was having a WWE executive on their screen, and they gave him the WWE entrance and everything, which was funny. But Tyrese Halliburton is a WWE legend, and obviously Triple H being there. I did see a video of Pat McAfee of them hyping up the Pacers, which is cool. He obviously comes from Indianapolis, which is cool. So, yeah, man. I didn't watch the game. I'm assuming the Pacers won. 3-0 or 3-1? 3-1, yeah, so they're gonna win. And then we're probably gonna get the Pacers versus OKC, which I'll end up watching. But yeah, shout out to Paul David Elliott for the $5 super chat. Jose Martinez coming through with $4.99. He says, not too happy Vaquer losing and haven't watched NXT in a minute, but all I remember, JC was always in trios, just a background girl. Which is true. She was always in trios with Toxic Attraction, and then now, of course, with Jasmine Nix and Fallon Henley. But that's actually the thing that I like about it is JC Jane, when she feuded with Gigi Dolan from the NXT 2.0 days, she showed a lot of potential to be a singles talent, and then WWE never committed to it. So I was happy to see that now they're committing to it. And I think that's her reward, man. She's a hard worker. You can clearly see that. She goes out there. This is ultimately a test for her. And if she does a great job, then she is going to do great things. If she doesn't do a great job, then clearly not, right? But look, Cora Jade got released. Gigi Dolan got released. There was talent who got released from NXT. She's a veteran who can hold it down. I think it's a very safe choice. So I have nothing against that. Billy, would you like to chime in on that?
Man, I mean, it's just, again, NXT is one of those really cool places where you can just try things out and nobody's really going to bat an eye. So JC Jane getting this opportunity, I mean, we'll see, right? We'll see how she does. It's super exciting. Knowing that, you know, she does come from a bunch of different trios and stuff like that. Again, just really cool that NXT does things like this, where they just kind of shock you. I don't know. I enjoy that. That's what I enjoy out of pro wrestling, is shock.
I like the idea of them trying different things and being experimental. But yeah, Jose, I would suggest trying to watch it and see what happens. Shout out to you. Thank you for the super chat. Poindexter dropping a $5 super chat. He says, when Mike Santana wins the TNA World Championship, do we see the standard of TNA makes a surprise Royal Rumble appearance? Because that would be fire. Yeah, I would hope so. Mike Santana's a G. At one point, he was rumored to come to WWE. It didn't end up happening. So now he's able to go into NXT and do this stuff there. I like Mike Santana. Very, very great talent. Really happy to see him leave AEW and thrive. Really, sometimes it's a good thing when talent leave AEW. Mike Santana is a perfect example of this. Like, he left AEW. He went back to TNA. He didn't sign with WWE. He's been very patient. He's having great matches. He had an amazing match with Mustafa Ali. Now he's in a position where he's on WWE TV, reaping the benefits of the partnership, and then he's going to compete for the TNA World Championship. I don't think he wins next week on NXT because I think Trick Williams will obviously be a heel, but I think they are going to create some sort of storyline here, which probably ends at Slammiversary. And Mike Santana is the kind of guy that people rally behind. Like, he's going to be the guy. Like, he's going to hold it down for TNA, and I think that's going to be a marvelous thing. And for a lot of people, they're wondering, why isn't Joe Hendry back in the hunt? I think it's a pretty much given at this point. TNA knows that Joe Hendry is not sticking around TNA. You can't invest in him as the future of your brand if it sounds like it's a sure thing he's going to NXT or WWE or whatever. So I think Mike Santana is the perfect person to do this. And when he does dethrone Trick Williams, that's going to be a feel-good moment for TNA. And I'm excited about this because now we have Trick Williams, a TNA champion, who's going to appear on both shows weekly. What do you think, Billy?
Actually, one thing that you've said a lot because you were like because you've been a big watcher of TNA.
Yeah.
Just knowing, like, there were chances that Will Ospreay could have signed it, TNA, so many different names. So they've now had to pivot and make guys feel big that maybe on the surface you wouldn't expect them to be big, right? And when you get those opportunities, when you get to give those opportunities, you get a guy like Mike Santana who is just naturally over with the crowd, even in NXT, and I can imagine in TNA, right? He's over at both places. It's like you get something special out of that. So, Ango, one thing about it is, brother, I know you have to be a little excited about what's happening with Mike Santana as a longtime watcher of TNA, because I know I'm excited.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, man. It's like it feels like it's paying off to be a TNA fan all those years of seeing Anthem and the down times, So it's cool to see them
Down
kind
period,
of
right?
exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point, and I'm excited. Shout out to Poindexter for the $5 super chat. Dwayne Jackson dropping $5. He says, since AEW's title has not been seen on TV since last year, do you think they had gone through a total redesign? That would be cool.
That would be.
I would be very happy with that. Not for any other reason than I think it's cool to freshen things up every few years. They've gone 6 years with the same design. That's a great super chat. Honestly, I think maybe that could be the case. That's what I'm thinking.
I'm just gonna sit up and say it probably isn't gonna happen, but it would be really cool if they did. I'd be a fan of it.
Yeah.
Screen. So
They do, but of course the physical title, and who knows, maybe, they have this excuse me.
you good? Oh, you good?
Yeah, I'm good. They have this weird I don't know. I guess my point is I think they should do it. But they have this weird thing about tradition and keeping things. I think they should update it. I'll just leave it at that. Shout out to Dwayne Jackson for the super chat. Adam dropping a $5 super chat. He says, I don't see Vince getting WWE back because if he did, it would send WWE back a few years. Can you imagine Vince McMahon getting WWE back with WWE HD with it? I don't want to see Vince McMahon back. I think I kind of prefaced that a lot. I know I wouldn't support it, and that would just be doom and gloom for me as a wrestling fan. Vince McMahon in 2025 should just stay away from professional wrestling.
No good. Leave him alone.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And shout out to Adam for the super chat. Justin Kennington coming through with another super chat for $1.99. He says, hot take, Sean Legacy should dethrone Obafemi. I love Sean Legacy. I think he's incredibly talented. I look forward to his future in WWE. I'm going to disagree entirely, though. Sean Legacy should become the Evolve World Champion, and he should hold it down for Evolve, eventually move to NXT, and he should not be the one to dethrone Obafemi. I also don't think that would be a fun match to watch. I think stylistically it would be rather difficult. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but yeah, that's kind of how I see that.
To see Sean Legacy in a big spot, but very make him the Evolve World Champion, let him run things down there for a little while. They obviously need a guy like Sean Legacy right now. So let that happen. He does have a shot at the North American Championship.
Yeah. Shout out to Justin Kennington for the super chat. Phil coming through with a $4.99. He says, Jasper Monster, a true threat to Oba. JC shocks the world, and it makes sense with the story she has with Fallon. Love the Tatum stuff. Call ups make sense. Yeah, I think this is great. I think all of these are really good points. I'm really excited to see more of Jasper Troy on NXT. I think they're building him up properly. Which what a good message that sends to people to watch LFG. Hey, person who wins LFG is going to come in as a big deal. Which, by the way, Shiloh Hill is somebody who's going to be on next season, and like Xena Sterling also next season. So this is why I'm loving the WWE system, right? We got all this talent moving up to the main roster, and then we're going to have Evolve and LFG people come in. Again, it keeps NXT fresh consistently. And one thing I would like to see happen is get some of those people on the main roster who aren't being utilized. Go ahead and put them in NXT as well. Yeah. Shout out to Phil for the super chat. True Flight 11 dropping at $9.99. He says, people being upset about Trick winning the TNA title are hypocrites. They're the same people okay with Kenny Omega and act like that partnership was good. I'm going to keep it very brief. I don't think the TNA and AEW partnership was beneficial at all in the slightest to TNA. However, I will say it was still very cool to see Kenny and Christian hold that belt. That was a very wonky time for professional wrestling. I think in the past year, even before the partnership with WWE, TNA has shown momentum and growth. And so now that they're working with WWE, you see even more of that. But the purpose of the partnership is for both sides to benefit. I actually have a hard time seeing how WWE benefits in the slightest other than doing cool matches and moments, right? But for TNA, they have much more to benefit. Trick Williams is not going to go into TNA and have any like comparison to Kenny. He's not on Kenny's level. But the fact that he'll be actively on TV every week, I think, will be a very nice touch. And that's what's going to make that partnership thrive. So that's just kind of how I view it. But yeah. Shout out to True Flight 11. Dwayne Jackson coming through with a super chat for $5. He says, when does Cedric Alexander join AEW in the Hurt Syndicate? Well, he's talking about it, but there hasn't been any confirmation as to whether or not he signed with the company or what's going to happen. So I don't want to necessarily comment on that. But MJF is in the Hurt business. That's probably not going to happen. That's probably not going to be a long-lasting thing, and then eventually we'll see Cedric is kind of how I see it playing out.
That's how I've always seen it playing out over there, too.
Awesome.
Simple.
As of right now, it looks like those are the super chats. But Billy, I want to ask you a question before we conclude today's show. Who doesn't want us to spice things up on a live show, right? Did you see the Deonna Purrazzo tweet? Okay, while we were live, Deonna Purrazzo was responding to a fan on Twitter, and someone said, "Are you pulling up to Dynamite tonight?" Deonna Purrazzo decided to quote tweet this and say, "During picture in picture, probably." Now, this ended up with Thunder Rosa responding with a face palm emoji and a laughing emoji. But clearly, Deonna Purrazzo, I don't know what happened with AEW and Deonna Purrazzo, but they don't utilize her. She was made out to be a big signing. She left TNA, which now looks like a terrible decision. What do you make of that?
I mean, listen, we've heard numerous stories about people who were unhappy in their situation in AEW, and I can imagine, as sad as it is, this is going to be another one of those situations where we just hear of maybe it wasn't the best experience for this person. Maybe they didn't have the best experience with Tony or whoever at AEW, um, which is obviously never any good, right? Because the thing is like if you're going to work, especially like this kind of job, wrestling, you're supposed to love it. It's supposed to be something that you enjoy always and never really struggle with. But obviously, there is a business side to it. And, sadly, maybe that just hasn't worked out in Deanna's favor. So I hear this and I think to myself, man, it just sucks because we've seen it so many times.
All that focus went to Mercedes and Tony Storm that I think they forgot about some of those talents they signed, and that's problematic.
Yes.
So,
yeah, I agree.
Very, very crazy. Ladies and gentlemen, we have gone through all the super chats. We have gone through all the stories, and that will be the perfect way to end the episode. Ladies and gentlemen, it is May 28th, Wednesday, 2025. I thank you all for watching us and joining us live. As always, you can support the show, become a member, click subscribe. We're on the hunt for 100,000 subscribers. Also, make sure you guys check out BillyTKO on YouTube and TikTok. He does watch-alongs for all the wrestling shows. You definitely don't want to miss those. What an amazing day. Tons of big stories. You guys have absolutely killed it in the chat. We'll be back tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern. Don't forget to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for watching. That is the Ango Show.